Chair, I can confirm we're now live.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone to this remote meeting of the Joint Waste Disposal Board. Please note that the meeting is being broadcast and recorded. Now to the first item on the agenda. Are there any apologies for absence?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Members of the committee, please turn on your microphone and confirm you are present only when Hannah calls your name. Anyone who does not respond will be recorded as giving their apologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Mrs. Hayes.
Present.
Councillor Harrison.
Councillor Harrison. No. You're mute, Councillor Harrison. But we
Present. Yeah, I was trying to find my mouse.
Thank you. Councillor Barnett Ward.
Present.
Councillor Page.
Good morning. Present.
Councillor Bath.
Morning. Present.
And Councillor Murray.
Good morning. Present.
Thank you.
Morning to everyone that's present. The full text for declaration of interest is set out in the agenda in item 2. If any member has a disclosable pecuniary interest or any affected interest to declare, please indicate and I will come to you in turn. Are there any? Thank you. There are no declaration, but may I remind everyone that you can make a declaration at any time should it occur to you at that later point. Declaring a disclosable pecuniary interest will need to leave the meeting when we get to that relevant part. Right, all above board and you're all aware. Right, the next agenda item is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the meeting of the board held on the 8th of October 2020. But before I ask Councillor Page to second the motion, please indicate if you have any issue with regards to accuracy. Are there any? Councillor Page, are you happy to second that?
Yes, just more than happy to, Chair.
Thank you. So that's item dealt with. Thank you, Councillor Page. Nobody has indicated, so therefore the issue, I'll take this as all agreed and you're all happy with that. Are there any matters, just in case, I'll come back to it. The next item on the agenda is to consider matters of urgency. Are there any?
No, none notified, Chair.
Thank you. Then we get on moving quite well here. Agenda item 5 is the progress report by Oliver. Please would you present the report, Oliver? Thank you. Good morning, Oliver.
Morning all. I'm going to hand over to Andy as we, as you'll remember, Chair, we kind of get the assistant directors to do an introduction. So I'll hand straight over to Andy.
Thank you. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Oliver. This report details waste flows and provisional recycling rates for April to November 2020, both showing impacts from the effects of measures employed during the current pandemic. As agreed, the report also provides a review of the HWRC booking system. The new platform is working well, with easier cancellation enabling more residents to book. The annual user satisfaction survey cannot be conducted in the usual, wholly independent manner as normal, but instead was conducted via an online form during December. More than 3,000 responses were received across both sites, and measures of overall satisfaction were high. They were at 88% for Longshot Lane and 89% for Smallmead. The main phase of the match-funded contamination project in Bracknell and Reading has now been completed, and the provisional results indicate positive results within the trial areas. A review of the rates for chargeable wastes at the HWRCs has also now been conducted. These charges are cost only. The councils do not seek to make a profit, but the RE3 partnership is proposing some reductions for items like soil and rubble. The report also includes an update on the launch of the RE3 paint community reuse scheme that is now available to visitors at our sites. The report briefs members on communication activities, including new stickers applied to the bottle banks. It also contains information on successful engagement with residents via a range of online webinars. And finally, the report details online communication assets that were produced to support the introduction of the food waste collection services and festive recycling. Thank you, Chair, and Oliver and myself would welcome any questions.
Chair, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. Before I ask for other persons whether or not they have any questions, Andy, can you just let me know, during the last couple of months, now that we are at Longshot and Smallmead still on the booking system, staff or the numbers of staff, are we having any problems?
Thank you, Chair. If you don't mind, I'm going to pass that over to Oliver, who's living it more directly than myself. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. There are, I think we're probably all experiencing this over the period of the last sort of month and a half.
Yes.
It'd be easy to say it's this new variant, but the rates of transmission do appear to be up. I think when we started this last spring, February, March time, preparing for what we thought was coming, certainly my expectations were that staff would get it, would get the virus a lot more quickly than has been the case. And we have done very well, both a combination of everyone's adherence to policies and everything else to get to this stage. But it does seem to be that the situation has escalated. We know that we had 24 members of staff, of RE3 staff, either having to self-isolate because they had been contacted by track and trace or because a family member had been showing symptoms. So that's quite a large proportion. It's almost 25% of the workforce. But we know that there are, if not similar numbers, then certainly higher rates of transmission in the other workforces as well. The 3 waste collection teams are grappling with this issue. So no service reductions at the moment, Chairman. But all of the contingencies that we put in place, again, as I say, when we were planning last sort of spring, remain open to us.
Thank you. It's just to make sure, because like with when we in Bracknell had a problem, we were able to have another partner come and help us to make sure the work was the load tonight. If there's any help we can give it to FCC, I'm sure you'll put something into place there. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Councillor Page, you have your hand up. Is there a question, sir?
Well, a question and comment in respect of the first recommendation about retaining the booking system. All I've had has been compliments and very positive comments since we introduced. I know there was the initial hiccup when we switched software, whatever it was, but ever since then, all the feedback that I and colleagues that have spoken to me have had is entirely positive. And I don't think there's really much of a debate, unless people feel there should be, about whether we should retain a booking system. We may want to review whether there are other models of booking systems that might be more suitable. I don't know, but certainly so my question to officers is, when they say in 5.23, members may also wish to consider a review of the booking system independently from the current pandemic. Well, I'm not really too clear what they're talking, well, what sort of how far that review goes, because I thought we as a board had already indicated our considerable satisfaction with the booking system, expressed a view in principle that we wanted it retained. And clearly always the mechanics of it can be reviewed, but I wonder if officers could just expand a bit about that, because obviously the environmental benefits from reductions in queuing, as well as the benefits to the people themselves, are self-evident and have been proved over the period of the pandemic. So just a bit of clarity around that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
I agree with you there. Oliver or one of the officers like to speak to that? Please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it is just that, members, really, just to say that the booking system was brought in as a direct response to the pandemic, and probably, if we're honest, we may not have considered it as an option without that kind of stimulus. And so really it's just to say we know it's working. We have introduced at 522, I think it is, just to say we'll roll it forward a little bit, but we're just being cautious not to kind of roll it forward unduly. But I completely agree with what members have said. I think if we have a review which just takes stock of the direct evidence, maybe if we can do it, quantify what the difference between lots of cars idling and very few cars idling and people whizzing in and out, how that's impacted on recycling rates, those sorts of things. And that would then at least give a firm basis for any decision that members and the board wish to make about the booking system going forward.
So we might look at, when we come to the recommendations, when it comes to, as described in 522, now when we come for June, maybe a paper of how we can retain it as we have it. As such, okay, that we'll come to that. I see that Councillor Murray, you have a question or a few questions?
Yes, thank you, Chair. One of my questions has actually just been answered in response to Councillor Page's question, but I will echo the points that he has just made in terms of the praise that has been given to the booking system. My question is, have we seen a noticeable increase in usage at our 2 recycling centres since we have swapped from a booking system where you couldn't cancel and the appointment be reallocated to one where you can now cancel and that appointment be reallocated to somebody else?
Which of the officers would like to answer that one? Oliver? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a bit inconclusive, if I'm being completely honest, at the moment. And I think that's partly due to the fact that we've got Christmas in the way. We've also seen now the post-Christmas kind of lull. There are, and you may have noticed, anyone who's looked at the booking system, that there are places available. I think that's probably, councillors, one of the things that we would want to include in any review. We know that facility is there. We know in the period running up to Christmas that the number of no-shows had improved, but not to the extent we were hoping. So I think we have to continue pushing that message that if situations change and you're not now going to come, please cancel your booking. It is obviously dead easy for people not to cancel the booking, but I think that's probably a little bit of work for us to do, plus a bit more monitoring. And then I would be able, hope to be able to provide you with a far more sort of evidenced answer to all of that. It's improved, but it's not where we want it to be.
Okay, thank you. Does that cover that for you, Councillor Murray? Any other question?
Yeah, actually, just as a little follow-up to that, with the booking system now in place, are we able to map and understand and measure when the key usage times are and where the lull times are?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. It's a peculiar one, this, because actually what the booking system does is it controls when the busiest times are to a certain extent, because if you look down the list of when times are available, whilst you are going to pick the one that's convenient for you, if that's available, if it's not available, then you'll probably move on to another day. So in a sense, it kind of throws a blanket over that aspect. The old system was a more direct indication of when the busy times were, because there would be a honking great queue outside the gate. So what this does is effectively to kind of moderate the flow. Those are the advantages that people are experiencing. But as I say, in a sense, it does kind of mask that understanding of when people most want to come. What we know, though, of course, is we can control their level of experience to a far higher degree when they get there. And that may be something that we want to take into account if we do a review of the booking system going forward, so that we can try and cover both bases, I suppose.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you.
And that covers it for you, Councillor Murray? Fine. Adelma, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Mine is on the no-shows as well, the booking question.
as you've covered, we've got still a high proportion of no-shows than we were hoping. What's the impact of that on availability? Is that causing booked out slots and therefore inconvenience to other people, or is it just a little bit frustrating that we're not showing the true capacity? And is there a facility within the system to trigger, presumably we've got their email addresses or some sort of contact details when they've booked through the booking system? Is there a way to trigger an automatic response saying you booked a slot, you didn't turn up, that meant that somebody else couldn't use it, could you please cancel next time that you can't come? In the sort of, if you don't go to your doctor's appointment, and I know that's a more serious thing, they will contact you and say you missed this appointment and that's on your record. I'm not suggesting we put things on people's records, but is there a way of letting them know that they could have cancelled and it would have been helpful to other residents if they had?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I'm going to shortly hand over to one of my colleagues just to answer that second part. But we do send a reminder, as many of you probably have experienced. The question I suppose I'm going to hand over to Sarah or Monica is just whether or not we've heard from Journey, whether or not we could actually, I know we can do a post follow-up, it's whether or not it could be triggered directly in the way that you described, Councillor. So if one of you two could bail me out.
You don't seem to be having much help there.
I
I don't think is great. Monica, go ahead, Monica.
We certainly check that directly. I at the moment suspect it could be possible only as an automatic email everyone who visited or not visited. I'm not sure that the system at the moment would differentiate of those who are no-shows, but certainly Journey is looking for some tweaks to their system. They're upgrading it, and we definitely will feedback that idea, and hopefully it will be possible. But it's a very good suggestion. At the moment, I believe we could only do it manually, so we would have to pick up those I would not want to say that, but those frequent people who not show frequently, and then email them. But I'm sure that we will feedback this comment because it's very useful.
Positive, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, any more questions on this? I'm seeing none. Just one for myself again on page 11. Something to be thinking about, Oliver, or if you can let me know, looking at the recycling rates and what has varied now that people are working from home. Are we having any indication on a lot more cardboard and that sort of paper? Because people are now, what is it, the Amazon man or whatever it is that comes, the white van man seems to be at everyone's house every day. Any form of increase on that sort of front?
Chairman, yeah, it's a really good question, and we will cover that off in the presentation later. Yeah. A specific graph that will show what the change has been over time. So if we can come back to that, we do know that Grace has put together and has been tracking COVID tonnages throughout the period. And I've got a handy post-it note here with the specific numbers that she's provided to officers. We know that
Thank you.
Residual waste is up by 10% over the period of from the first lockdown. Curbside recycling is 13%. The garden waste collections are up 21%, and we're going in a particular direction here. Food is up 28%, obviously particularly in Wokingham at the moment. The bring banks are up 33%. So
there is movement where it's because people are not in an office, and this is what I suggest we'd be looking for in the future. But that's the. Is there any other questions, ladies and gentlemen, on agenda item 5? I can see no hands up, no smiley faces. I'd like to therefore move the recommendations with that, with 2.4, Oliver, if we can look at the presence that we will take it to the end of June when we have our next meeting and that, but looking at it as a permanent fixture, something of that, a paper, if you don't mind.
Certainly, Chairman.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there's everyone in agreement, can I take it that 2.1 through to 2.6 on page 9 is accepted? Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Adele. Thank you. And there's no other questions to it or any other input you want to put to that? No? Right.
Great.
Right, the recommendations are set out and we're all happy, and I thank the councillors as no one has indicated otherwise. Right, just to note before we move on to the next item on the agenda that the next board meeting is scheduled for Thursday, the 29th of April. Have we all that? And of course, if we have it in the paper, we can look for the part we've just done with regards to the booking system. Agenda item 7 is to receive, sorry, I think I may have jumped there. Urgent items of business. Are there any?
No, none notified, Chair.
I can just about hear you, dear.
None notified, Chair.
Thank you. So then we've done 5 is the progress report. Date of the next we've done. Then we get on to agenda item 7. Is to receive the RE3 annual financial report. This set of items includes the likely disclosure of exempt information, and so we will be moving into private session to discuss these items. May I therefore move that pursuant to Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities Access Information Regulations 2012 and having regard to the public interest, members of the public and press be excluded from the meeting. The consideration of item 9 and 10, which involves the likely disclosure of exempt information under the following category of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including an authority holding that information. Is that seconded? Aren't any of you happy to second that? Adele?
I'll second it.
Yeah, thank you, sweetheart.
So,
Yeah, I can,
Whoever's quickest on the button.
Yeah, okay. Moving into private, then we will be moving into private section, okay? Just to confirm, I asked the clerk to close the meeting for this item, that the live stream will be a restart for agenda item 9 and the workshop of the RFE. Kirsty, please, can you close the public part of the meeting and to confirm when we're back working together? Is that okay? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll confirm when we're no longer streaming.
I'll take myself down for a while.
Chair, I can confirm that we are back live.
Thank you very much, well, ladies and gentlemen. We are back, and I thank you that you've turned back up. I will hand over to Oliver for agenda item number 9. Oliver, over to you, young man.
Thank you, Chair. This session is sort of like the culmination, I suppose, of several presentations and bits of work that we've been weaving in and out of the meetings throughout the year. If you remember all the way back to January last year, at our board meeting, there was a discussion between the members on a new pathway, a strategic pathway. Things have, like in a lot of places, things have been a bit delayed by other imperatives coming along, but we've tried to kind of keep that going throughout the year. And this session, going back to our last meeting just before Christmas in October, our last session, members agreed to have a kind of workshop, but they wanted to have separate sessions within each council to inform that. Mm-hmm. So the presentation we're just about to give is really just to kind of set those separate sessions up. Then each of the councils is going to proceed into its own sort of strategic session where each of the councils will kind of set aspirations and objectives which we can bring back to the partnership and synthesize into a shared sort of new pathway. So I'm going to talk in a moment. I'll share my screen. I'm going to talk in a moment about some of the challenges, some of the things we talked about, some of the interesting aspects of the partnership. And if there are any questions, we'll take those at the end of each section. Yes. So I'm just going to share my screen. I think that's the one we want. So can everyone see that. How's that looking?
Everyone
Yeah,
happy with
that's
that? Any problems?
Yeah, we can see that.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
I don't feel like I can speak Zoom quite yet, so that's really handy just for someone to confirm. Right. So without further ado, let's get going. Bit of background here on what I've just said, really. New pathway requested. That's what we're doing today. Series of presentations, session to consult with key stakeholders. We'll then collate and reconcile the findings and the aspirations from each council, and then we'll bring that back as a draft consultation, a draft strategy for consultation, and thereafter adoption. And obviously the big businesses will be sort of delivery on those aspirations. Going to break this presentation down into sort of 4 brief sections. One, a little tiny bit of background, some stuff on current status, which hopefully is helpful. Some of the future challenges we've looked at and some we haven't yet looked at, and then obviously just finally what the strategic opportunity is for us here. So this is the first one, background. It's been a bit of a funny year. We started off the last 12 months, I suppose, as we sit here planning for what we thought was going to be we didn't really know what a pandemic was, did we, properly, and at that point. But we've had, and you've reflected on it during the meeting, members, we've had lots of thank yous from residents. We've had members of the public clapping for staff, and a real recognition, I think, of the work that gets done within waste management alongside a lot of other essential services as well, obviously. And it's still going on, as we've talked about in the meeting, and it's probably worth just praising the waste collection staff across all 3 councils, and also our contracted staff at the RE3 partnership as well from FCC. They've worked really hard over the last 12 months to keep everything going. And so lots of thank yous. We even got a lovely painting from a resident in Bracknell, which was fantastic. So that's a kind of thank you to the residents and a thank you to the staff as well for what's been a difficult period. Here's some examples of some of the things we do as a partnership. And there's quite a lot, really. We managed to kind of cram quite a lot in here. Lots of great communications, messaging, builds a really strong platform for the councils, both as a partnership and as individual councils. The one in the middle there on the left-hand side is really good news, and next week is an exciting time because we may find out whether one of our 2 facilities, both of our facilities, are up for an award as the best recycling facility of the year, which is pretty unique opportunity for us. So fingers crossed on that. But these are examples of what we do together as councils in a partnership, and that's really where we are at the moment. Moving on, there's a little bit here about our previous pathway. So on the left-hand side, there's a graph showing our recycling rates in 2015-16. And that was where we introduced the pathway, which detailed plastic recycling, which we've now delivered. So we've got a wider range of plastics that we recycle now within the RE3 area, and all of it within the UK. We've introduced the wood recycling, reintroduced wood recycling at the HWRCs. We've made some improvements to our HWRCs. And we've also introduced food waste recycling, or at least the capacity to recycle food in that period. And obviously, when the new changes are brought in Bracknell and Reading, that will get everyone to the position that Wokingham has enjoyed in terms of food waste for some time. And there's an indication on the right-hand side of what we expect our recycling rates would be at that point. So really good news. And I suppose I put that up as a kind of indication of what we can do once we've made our mind up about what we're going to do, and then we go out and do it. So that's that section. A little bit about our current status. There's a slide for each of the councils. Some background on Bracknell, around 48,000 tonnes a year, population of about 123,000 people, current recycling rate at 43%, energy recovery is dealing with about 41%, and at the moment, roughly 16% is going to landfill. In terms of contamination, that's around, this is the things in the recycling that we would prefer not to be there, is about 16%. And as we'll see in a moment, there is still a considerable amount of the green bin, as it is in Bracknell, that could be recycled. And that's, in a sense, that's really good news, because it vindicates and supports the idea of the changes that are being made, that are shortly to be made. Similar sort of situation for Reading, about 62,000 tonnes per annum, population of 164,000, recycling rate at the moment of 34, energy recovery at 53%, and landfill at around 13%. The contamination is 20% of the recycling at the moment, and the recyclable content of the grey bin, as it is in Reading, is broadly similar, 62%. And again, that's one of the reasons why the changes in Bracknell and Reading are bound to be successful, because there's that recyclable content that we can get out of the grey bin. And then in Wokingham, slightly different position, because obviously Wokingham has already introduced some changes. So you can see here recycling rate of 51%, that's really good, over 70,000 tonnes, slightly larger population, or the largest population, energy recovery at 43%, and landfill down at a brilliant 6%. And again, that's partly due to the food waste and the recycling going on. You can see there is a direct correlation there. At the moment, the contamination is at about 25% in the recycling. And part of that is also being addressed by changes that Wokingham are making in their collection system in the forthcoming year. And people will recognise some of that is around the keeping the paper dry and those sorts of things. So again, another reason why those changes are justifiable and should be supported, really. And then the recyclable content of the blue bags is around 50%, so down from what we've seen previously. And again, that's partly due to the fact that food waste is already being taken out by a lot of people. So those are the sort of background performance positions of the three councils at the moment. We'll just have a look at composition, and on the left-hand side, in each case for each council, on the left-hand side is a composition analysis that we did of the green bin for rubbish in 2019, and then on the right-hand side is the same, but for 2020, and you can see there's some consistency there. The important point I want to point out really is that the light blue section at the bottom is effectively the stuff in each bin that should be there. That's the stuff that at the moment we don't really have a reliable route to recycle. All the other, the kind of rainbow bit and that big grey section, is all recyclable via existing schemes and collections within the RE3 area. So great news. Bracknell will very shortly be in a position to address that grey section, and the other sections, the paper and card, the plastics, so on and so forth, in the middle there, can already be addressed. So there could be some work we can do to kind of encourage greater capture in those areas. The Reading comparison is broadly similar. On the left-hand side, 2019, and that light blue section at the bottom, as you can see here, 40% and 38% is effectively, as I say, what should be in that bin at the moment. So again, great scope and a real justification, if you like, for the changes that Reading is putting in place shortly. And then in Wokingham, it's a different situation. And again, it's partly that transition that happened in between these, or that really took effect in between these two analyses. So on the left-hand side, you can see the analysis that was undertaken shortly before the food waste collections really kicked in and got started. And on the right-hand side, you can see the impact of that. And it looks like that blue section has got bigger, but I must remind everyone that's to do with the proportion. Actually, what's happened is a large section of that grey block on the left-hand side has been taken out by the separate food waste collection. So if it makes the situation in Wokingham look slightly worse, that's actually not the case. It's much better. Really, I suppose what we should be aiming for in future when we look at these graphs is for that light blue section to say 100%. So again, that's good news, and perhaps a little sort of window on the future for that Reading and Bracknell are looking to kind of replicate with the changes they are making. But the other thing to say about these is that there is still 50% to go, and more than 50% in the other council cases. So that's really good in terms of our aspirations to achieve high levels of recycling across the partnership. Lots still to be done. We then wanted to have a quick look at costs, because obviously the environmental performance is really keenly important, but also we know we need to be really thrifty with what we're spending on waste. Waste can be an expensive sort of service area, and it's obviously better for us, and it's an aspiration, I'm sure, for us to divert funds into other core services, particularly where we can see that there are improvements we can make. So as a brief and a broad summary of the costs, we spend about, collectively across the partnership, about £14 million on waste collection every year, about £23 million on disposal, managing the waste, what we do with what's in the bins. There are overheads, facility costs, all those sorts of things of around 5 million. And income, things like the charges that we levy, again, no profit taken as we discussed earlier, but that is income nonetheless, and government grants to support the contract we've got, they come to £8 million. So a net cost of £35 million. So there's a considerable amount of money. And really the point of this slide is to illustrate to people that we can't just look at collection and disposal as separate systems in their own right. We have to look at them as part of a cycle, or a kind of open system themselves. And there's great scope really for us to make improvements. And I mentioned that in terms of the strategic process that we're going through here today. Oh, I went too far. Anyway, these are our current factors. These are the kinds of things that we're thinking about and having to address at the moment. The demands on the market. So what materials can be recycled? What do the producers of packaging and that sort of thing, what do they want? Changes in council waste services. We've just talked about those. Legislation. Our engagement with the public, the quality and quantity of the recyclables we're collecting. We've mentioned that already. Maximising efficiency, we've just discussed. And obviously at the moment, there's that key, we hope, time-constrained factor of the pandemic. And above all of that, and a constant, is our approach to climate change, which we'll talk about a bit more in a moment. So those are amongst perhaps the top imperatives for the councils to be considering. The heading really says it all here. You know, we manage within the contract to recognise and accommodate difference. Nobody has to do absolutely the same thing all the time. We've got 3 quite different schemes of collection, which is what you're seeing here. Bracknell, Reading and Wokingham have different changes, and what's reflected is what is going to happen as we get into 2021. So that shows that there can be flexibility, and indeed there is flexibility. These next couple of slides are really just focusing on what will be some broad imperatives for each council. So it's clearly going to be very important for Bracknell that the rollout of their new collection system is successful. After that, we know there are plans to roll the new collections out into flats. So that's going to be, those are the key imperatives to start off 2021 with. The same thing for Reading. We know that flats is a sort of large proportion of the population within Reading. So that again is a key focus. In Wokingham, again, perhaps slightly further down the path in terms of their food waste. So again, a focus on how can we bolster and maintain levels of capture. And obviously, again, the change in the collection system that's being planned around making sure that paper and card is dry, and the benefits that can come from that. So in their own ways, the councils are all in quite similar situations, really. Some collective focuses, the quantity of recyclable, we looked at those graphs of composition and we know there's more we can do. The quality, reducing the contamination. We know that that's really, really important from the perspective of what the market wants and whether or not we can continue to thrive as councils collecting recyclables. And our communication, our engagement with residents, the booking system allows us a channel of communication that we previously didn't have. We know that the councils are working incredibly hard at the moment in terms of communication on all fronts, and particularly to do with the changes in collection. And there's more work we can do on communication as we go forward. Similar slide on the HWRC, around 35,000 tonnes per annum, so a much smaller amount than is ultimately being collected. Under normal conditions, we're getting around 800,000 visitors a year. Recycling and reuse rate at the sites is up to 83%, as we've just reported. We can't send as much waste from the HWRCs to energy recovery, so that has to be kept down, unfortunately, which means that ultimately the bulk of what's left goes to landfill. The reusable, recyclable residual waste at Longshot Lane is about 44%, and the recyclable content of residual waste at Smallmead is slightly less, 29%. So again, there's more that we can do there, and that's a challenge for the partnership and for the contractor going forward into 2021. Again, similar. What are the focuses for the HWRCs? We've just talked about the booking system and a review of it. Customer engagement, perhaps using the customer engagement that we have at the sites. We've got meet and greet, so we're talking to every single customer, which is really helpful. We've also got the booking system, and we're able to use that. And to address the recyclable content in what's currently still being disposed of, a review of treatments. What other things can we recycle that we're not recycling at the moment at the HWRCs? How can we improve our performance there? Sort of penultimate section on the future now. We broke this section down into 5 themes that I thought might be pertinent as a way of focusing attention, I suppose. So how our services relate to local residents and businesses, what the councils as organisations need to get out of waste and the waste service, the environmental impacts from waste, legislation and what that's going to do, and the material markets, that external and very important nowadays factor that we have to address. And together those 5 seem to encompass the strategy that we need to come up with. So I'm going to just quickly go through each of those with an example of the sorts of things that we might want to be looking at. These are examples of things that will be of importance to our local stakeholders, helping people to do the right things. We know there's a great degree of enthusiasm for waste management and recycling. What happens to it? Can we do more to help people understand what we're doing with their waste? Waste as a positive green activity there at the bottom, and as a potential entry-level kind of activity that people can engage in on a day-to-day basis, which has a wider environmental impact. But the one I wanted to pick out is a change in demographics and population, and I know that's a factor which will be apparent and be is considered by councils regularly in terms of other services, but perhaps we haven't hitherto perhaps looked at it in as much detail at waste level. So these graphs are taken from the Office of National Statistics modelling on population change over time. And I think that's perhaps the biggest caveat that I can give these. They are models. They are not kind of written law of what's going to happen. But what the ONS is projecting between the years of 2020 and 2040 is a change in shift. And I suppose what you can see here is I've chosen 4 guide age ranges at the bottom in each graph: 20 to 29, 40 to 49, 60 to 69, and 80 to 89, because we don't necessarily need to look at the whole range of populations, but just to see that flow. What we're probably seeing here in the left-hand side, which is the percentage change, is probably what we expected to see, which is an aging population profile for each of them. The interesting one that I thought was that 40 to 49, the second group from the left, where there appears in both cases, the left-hand side, as I say, is the percentage change. The right-hand side is actually the change in number of residents that is being projected by the ONS. We see that sort of partial hollowing out of that 40 to 49 age group and an increase in the older age groups as we go. I actually suspect that's probably not great news. It's not news. It's probably what people are expecting, but it does offer some interesting insight into perhaps how our services may need to change. Are people going to be able to take a trip to the tip to the extent? Are we going to have more people who perhaps would need an assisted collection? These are just things to think about in terms of our how we deliver our services going forward. The other thing to throw into the mix, of course, is that we don't know, and although there have been some rumours and sort of, you know, tittle-tattle, I suppose, that we may find that people who have been living in cities and particularly big urban areas as a result of the pandemic are kind of planning on moving out to places more like, you know, more like the RE3 area, which may throw all of these projections into disarray, I suppose. Moving on to the next one, the councils. These are factors that we wanted to look at in terms of councils. We already do cross-boundary sharing, and we try and work together in terms of efficiency. What commercial appetite have the councils got to try and reduce costs and thrive as we go forward? What interface with other services can waste have? The two I've chosen really to focus on as in this section is waste as a high-profile council service and the need for savings and our kind of agency over cost. What can we do? We're unique, really, in the sense that we've got sort of all three corners available to us of a triangle that involves our stakeholders, our collection facilities, and our own physical waste management and processing facilities. And really the point about this is how can we make the most of that while all of that is still available to the councils? How can we make the most of that? What things can we do? How can we flex our both commercial and kind of scale in order to benefit? Can we make more money to support other services? Can we, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, can we reduce our reliance on driving waste long distances? How can we serve stakeholders, not just residents, but our local businesses as well? This slide is around the scope that we've got to make savings. So what we're showing here is a projection forward into 2022-23, and the potential, if we could collect 40% of the waste that we talked about earlier, at the bottom here on the left-hand side with this colourful bar graph, it's a copy of one of the ones we looked at earlier, the composition. This is Wokingham's one in this case, and the light blue section at the bottom is that 50% of waste that should be going to disposal. The right-hand bar at the bottom here with the yellow section represents 40% of the available recycling. If we could capture that in our recycling collections, we could achieve the savings there at the top, massive reductions in disposal costs, potential additional income, and a slight increase in the processing cost for recycling, but offset clearly by those savings. And the purpose of these graphs and this illustration really is, again, just to stress that agency over costs. There's so much that can be done. Moving on to the environmental impacts, measuring carbon and opportunities to process waste locally are the two examples we've got here. We know there are others, the waste hierarchy, which we're trying to adhere to, best treatments for waste, efficiency. So we'll look at the environmental impacts. This is a illustration of the UK and where we send our materials. There are actually only 3 material reprocessors that we use that aren't in the UK at the moment. And that's really important because we know that there is a scope. Those scopes that on the right hand side are the way that the greenhouse gas protocol measures greenhouse gas emissions. So scope 1 are those emissions which are directly owned. That would be, for example, our refuse freighters. Scope 2 is the purchase of energy. We use quite a lot of energy in our processes. And scope 3 is the waste disposal. And we've previously looked at some graphs in the last session around the impact from our waste disposal, but we know that we need, in order to achieve our environmental impacts, we need to address all 3 of those scopes. We can't, if you like, and no one's suggesting we are, but we can't sort of divest ourselves of the indirect impacts that we have. So we've made some good progress in terms of where we send our waste, but there are other things that we can do. We can look at our vehicles and haulage, and we reported in the progress report that Reading has purchased its first electrical refuse freighter. We know that participation in capture can help us to reduce the impact. So how can we make our services more efficient? Energy usage, and perhaps even energy generation from waste, and even more local treatment. And perhaps there's a synthesis of those two that we can look at in terms of really doubling down on how we can deal with waste locally in ways that can benefit people locally. This is the graph that we reported. For each council, there are 6 columns to each. This shows an improvement on previous reporting in this area. The left-hand side is our tons of waste, and the right-hand axis is the number of kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And I would just turn your attention really to the right-hand side of this graph, where you can see a bright yellow section in the tons column. That's working collection of food waste. You can barely see it in the right-hand side, but what you can see is a massive reduction in those scope 3 treatment impacts from waste management. Some of that's recycling, some of that is to do with food waste, but that is the kind of improvement that the other 2 councils will shortly be making. So that's good news, but I suppose really we ought to reflect on the statement from the UK Committee on Climate Change, which is the statutory body created by the government to oversee climate change through the UK. And they're saying there, without substantial increases in policy ambition and new policies in a range of areas, waste will become an increasing share of emissions and could still have substantial emissions by 2050. Given lead times for changing waste management practices without a risk of unintended consequences, the waste sector requires new policy urgently. So the point really here is we are the people that are going to have to deliver this, and we can't leave it to other people. Each of the councils has made its climate change commitments, which is fantastic. And it now, I suppose, falls to us to reflect those in our aspirations. Here's what we have done. This is the massive reduction that the RE3 councils have achieved in terms of landfill. We know landfill is a significant contributor to the CO2 equivalent emissions from waste management. So this is good news. And it's perhaps those scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that we're going to want to focus on going forward. So some good news. Legislation. Those of you who know anything about waste management will know that there are some big changes in legislation coming. And I just wanted to talk about those alongside some of the other things, but just focus specifically on changes in waste collection and the forthcoming introduction of deposit return schemes, because they will have a big impact. So we know in terms of waste collection consistency, which is one of the big limbs of the new legislation, there are going to be some further consultations coming this year. We already know that the compulsory collections, there's a core set of 6 materials, which I'll show you there. Free garden waste collection seems to have strong public support, as I suppose it would do, and that seems still to be part of government's planning. Those are the 6 types of waste that councils will have to collect: glass, paper and card, plastic in various types, steel and aluminium tins and cans, food waste and garden waste. And at the bottom there, 3 prescribed collection systems, and those are the 3 prescribed collection systems there. So over time, as our contracts change, or at a point in time where we're required to, we will have to adopt one of these 3 collection systems. It will either have to be very similar to the one that we've currently got, mixed dry recyclables, plus the collection of glass, plus food waste, and plus garden waste collections. The other variant of that is a 2-stream system, where you'd have one bin or receptacle for paper and card, another bin or receptacle for plastic, glass and tins, and then additional collections of food waste and garden waste on top. And the final one on the right-hand side is a multi-stream collection, or sometimes called a curbside sort, where in effect a truck with lots of compartments goes around and members of staff separate as they go. Quite time consuming, but it does have its uses, and some councils operate that. The final bullet point at the bottom there is that the introduction of this new legislation will see the UK as a whole, England in particular, adopt a municipal waste approach to waste collection, similar to the one that's in operation in Wales already. And with the difference there is it's not just household. They're talking about non-household municipal waste from things like small and medium enterprises being collected alongside household waste. The deposit return schemes are obviously an important part. And the reason I've stuck this slide in is because there is a little bit of a potential contradiction between the requirement to collect those 6 material types and the DRS. Because if we go out and collect steel, aluminium cans, plastic bottles and glass bottles at the curb, as we would be required to do, but also at the same time, residents are encouraged to take those items of packaging back to the supermarket or back to a DRS terminal, it will cause some operational problems, I think. I think we can foresee that. But government is very keen on this. It's obviously got a lot of success elsewhere under some slightly different conditions than in the UK. But the government has modelled that there would be 2.3 million tonnes of that material placed on the market in the whole year of 2019. They assume that 85% of that would be captured by a DRS scheme, which would obviously lead to massive increases in recycling. They recognise the impact on council collections and the impact on the contracts that we've got in terms of the composition that many councils have committed to. And one of the positives out of this is that it would be intended to help on litter. Lots of items are litter that it wouldn't help on, but those items. So DRS is something just to be aware of. Finally, material markets. Does waste still have a value for councils? It clearly does. We've identified that. Where are we in the supply cycle? Do we understand that enough? The idea of UK self-sufficiency, that's obviously in terms of trade and those sorts of things and our position post January the 1st this year, but also from going back to that environmental point of view, can we be more self-sufficient because it's good for the environment? And the one I just wanted to look at here was changing composition. So you've got another graph here which shows the output from our material recycling facility, our MRF. Blue columns are 2010, green columns are 2020, just an estimate of where we'll be at the end of the year. And you can see that there's been quite a bit of change in terms of waste composition over time. The first one to look at is plastics. That's partly to do with the fact that we've increased the range of plastics we're collecting in that time. So that's a good thing. And all that plastic's being recycled in the UK. Look at the way that newspaper, paper in general, has fallen over that period. 2010 was shortly after the financial crisis. Lots of advertising revenues came out of newspapers. People started to get iPads and smartphones, and they began to get their news in different ways. So that's a significant change in composition. Card, and the chairman raised a very good point really earlier around those deliveries that we're all getting in cardboard, and that has partly helped to fill the gap in newspaper. And the level of rejects has, broadly speaking, stayed the same, but that's a clear area where we would want to address and improve. So coming to the end now, what is the strategic opportunity? And really just a quick point on what we're trying to do here. It's working out, I suppose, in a very aspirational and positive way, what we want the partnership to achieve. It's that enterprise that we need to be thinking about to start off with. We can work out what our enterprise as partners is going to be. We can then plan what actions are needed in order to deliver that, and then what information and what sources of evidence and so on and so forth we will need to be able to put those actions into place. And in a sense, we're going down the green line at the moment. We're working out what our enterprise is, and we're going to get to the bottom, and we'll have a massive, great amount of information, which we'll then reconcile, and we'll begin to work up through our actions over time in terms of delivery on the right-hand side, so that we can say, do you know what, we set out to do X and we have delivered it. So this is just a suggested framework for your deliberations. I certainly don't want to stifle creativity, and anything that you come back with will be absolutely fantastic. But really, what is the aspiration? What do you want the councils to achieve? What is the objective? What target? Can we measure it? What would it look like if we achieved it? What's the timescale? How urgent is it? And in terms of a sort of very superficial priority ranking of the proposals that you put forward. So that's the end of this presentation. I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to you, Chairman, if I may, just to bring the meeting to a close and wish everyone well on in their deliberations in a moment. Thank you very much, everyone.
Oliver, that was very informative, and I'm sure everyone will agree. It is important for the future, because as a partnership, we've got to be looking towards what we intend to be looking at, because it's contract 2031, isn't it?
Correct.
So it's not that far away, and it is something I'm glad we've started now to consider. Are there any questions for Oliver before we close down and go our ways to work? No? Well, I know I've got quite a few for my officers and that, and looking at the future. Yes, Tony.
Can I thank Oliver for
Yes.
an excellent presentation, which I think will serve us all well when it comes to further discussions in our respective authorities. On one thing that was raised at an earlier meeting in passing, now that we're all going down the food waste collection route, and it would appear that the tonnage being derived from that is obviously very good and increasing. What scope is there any advantage, and this comes to the commercial point as well, in looking at our own food waste facility somewhere, or
Yes.
are the economics, or is the economics of using the facility in Watlington still going to, or Wallingford rather, still going to be, will still make sense, or once food waste is established, will there be sufficient quantities to justify looking at a business case and partnering with one of the companies to have our own facility locally? Because obviously you raised the issue about travelling distances. Now it's not that far into Oxfordshire, I accept, but it's all part of that agenda. So I don't know whether there's anything around that we might be able to also include for discussions as well. Thanks.
Tony, you're on the same wavelength as myself, that I know my officers know that this is a feeling that I've had, that it could be a possibility for ourselves to be looking at our own anaerobic as such for the future, because we're going to have to consider emissions, the traveling, what they call the climate change of things that are happening. We also got to look at both sites, because redesigning how we're going to accomplish quite a bit. And this would all come into play. And I do think we definitely sound as if we're on the same wavelength there. And yes, I do. Oliver?
Chairman, thank you. Yeah, I think that's all possible. I think one of the key things that all partnerships find is that actually what you get by working together is that continuity of supply, which allows one or all three councils, if need be, to invest in a secure way in those sorts of things. I think that's a conversation we can definitely have. And I think if that's one of the aspirations that we want to explore as a partnership, then that's something really positive and something we can definitely look at.
Thank you. Any other questions, ladies and gentlemen? I'm sure we all want to go off in our little groups and see what we can come back and pester Oliver with in the future, and our officers, to make sure that we get the best for our residents.
So I've got another question. I just meant to ask about the timescale. in terms of feeding back, have officers discussed what sort of timescale they're working to? Because presumably this isn't just open-ended. We need to be given a sort of a deadline for when to feed back.
Oliver?
Chairman, thank you. Yeah, we have discussed this. I think, I mean, in terms of the immediate timescale, and I don't mean this in any to be at all flippant, we're actually well ahead of schedule. So you probably have got a bit more time this morning to do deliberations than was originally planned. Second, there will be a way of capturing. I think each of the councils has set up some kind support from other officers to help capture the aspirations this morning. I think, sort of on the hoof, I suppose, in terms of actual deadline, but I suppose maybe if we could get those thoughts back within a fortnight. We're not, none of you in taking part in this are kind of signing on the dotted line today. There will be other opportunities to add further thoughts in as we go. So don't please feel under any pressure. But I suppose in order to get cracking and get the ball rolling, if we could get those thoughts back within the fortnight, that would give officers plenty of time to get on with the next stage and that synthesis and beginning to put together a plan.
Food, as they would say it, food for thought. We get on with it the quicker we can. We'd have something before us, even maybe for the next board meeting and everything in place. Because by which time, March, April, yes, both Reading and Bracknell then will have started their food waste as well. And we'll have a more positive feeling about what's happening around us and the future, how COVID is progressing, how we're going to be dealing with our waste. Yes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if there's no other questions for our very, very good officers, I would thank you for attending this meeting and the workshop this morning. And that brings this meeting to an end. Our next board meeting, as I said, 29th of April. Can I take that as everyone happy? And we will be going off to our meeting now, which I'm being told it's been put to 10:45. I don't know why you'll be moving yours to it. But yes, I thank you all for attending. Thank you.